writing out the life cycle for Taenia solium with cystic fibrosis. Okay, then you're going to be responsible for knowing the difference between the tapeworm disease and cysticercosis. Okay, so knowing the difference means knowing the difference between the type of disease it is and how you get that particular disease. Okay, so the life cycle of Taenia solium with cysticercosis, and then knowing the difference between the diseases, because getting a tapeworm is a lot different than getting cysticercosis. And how you get a tapeworm is a lot different than how you get cysticercosis.
So there's a difference of how you get it
And the disease itself. One is significantly more severe than the other. So if you first go to Taenia, basically what you have, like there's like a little blurb that you can read if you need to remember this, but this is the first life cycle. This isn't the one that I have in your notes. Okay, the one I have in your notes actually has cysticercosis included in it. But I just figured before I add that, let me just like kind of quickly go through what this life cycle is, because this life cycle is very, very simple when you're just talking about getting a tapeworm. Like you guys already know from lab, and probably even coming into lab, everybody has heard of a tapeworm before. You know that you get a tapeworm from eating some kind of meat. So to get Taenia solium, and this one also includes Taenia saginata, which is the beef tapeworm, but we're really just going to be concerned at this point, Taenia solium. Okay, so you eat undercooked pork. So if it's thoroughly cooked, you would not get a tapeworm. If it's in the U.S. where meat gets inspected regularly, and that hasn't been anything that they've really significantly cut yet, that you can tell when meat is infected with tapeworms. So that has been something that has been controlled well. Whether it's getting a pork tapeworm or a beef tapeworm, the meat is inspected, you can see what they would refer to it as measled meat, like measles, because you actually see these little things here, these little, it says oncospheres. Okay, the oncospheres are basically the term that is the little larvae encysted. That's what a cysticercosis or cysticerce is. Okay, it's just a little larva, it's hatched from an egg, and it's like encysted, and that's in the meat. So the way that you would get it is eating undercooked meat. Then simply, it just comes out of that little cyst form and attaches in the intestines. And then there it continues to grow. And then it just grows and grows, and as it grows larger, like you can see here, those proglottids, those little sections, as they mature and they are full of eggs, they drop off. Those exit in the feces. So you ingest the undercooked meat that has the little cysticerce in it. Inside that, like if we go back to that other picture here, look at this, that's the little scolex. It has those little suckers on it. It has these little hooks that just attaches. And that's basically just that little scolex is just inside that cyst. So it's hatched from an egg, and it's just this little larvae that's enclosed in a little cyst. And the larvae basically is nothing much more than the scolex itself. So once it goes through the stomach, you know, that outer layer of the little cyst thing is dissolved in stomach acids. Now you have this little scolex, which then attaches to the small intestines, and there it stays, just growing and growing. Okay, as it matures, those sections, the proglottids, fall off. Inside inside those proglottids are eggs. Those eggs, or the proglottids themselves, full of eggs, are released in the feces. Okay, so it shows here in this picture, eggs are gravid proglottids in feces and passed into the environment. And then at that point, feces is in the environment. If you remember, I said something gross in lab about how some, of the rural cultures in South America and other areas too use pigs to take care of waste, because the pigs will eat all the stuff that's around, including all the feces. And then basically that's how the pigs then get infected. They ingest the eggs then hatch into that little larvae. That is all carried in their circulatory system, so it gets into their muscles, and then that's how it's in the muscles for us to eat. So just simply, we're ingesting undercooked meat. It's growing and maturing in our intestines. The gravid proglottids, or the mature proglottids and eggs, drop out in feces. They're ingested by the pig. If it was Taenia saginata, they'd be ingested by the cows. And then you eat that infected muscle tissue. Okay, so when somebody gets a tapeworm, it's not necessarily a serious type of infection. It hangs on. If they're really long, like the Taenia saginata can get to be 10 meters long. So that could cause problems just with the fact that it's so large. The pork tapeworm is around 3 meters. And people could have multiple tapeworms. You could end up with problems like malnutrition or intestinal problems, cramping, bloating, just discomfort and such. But a lot of people could have tapeworms and not have any symptoms at all. So the tapeworm disease in itself is not something that's really that serious of a disease. It's not something that is going to necessarily cause death or anything more serious than, could be, of course, in some cases if somebody was already very sickly or whatever. But how you get it is clear. There's only one way of getting it, and that's ingesting undercooked pork. If the pork has tapeworms in it and it's cooked properly, the tapeworms will be killed off. It won't be a problem. Okay, so everybody clear on the tapeworm disease? Okay, now here's something that is really of concern. And this is maybe before I say this, the human is the primary host, or sometimes called the definitive host. That's the host in which the parasite is an adult in, the primary. Whereas the pig in this case is the secondary or intermediate host. That's where the parasite is in a larval form. And most parasites are host specific, so mostly they don't infect a whole bunch of different hosts, just certain hosts. In this particular case with Taenia solium, the human being can also be an intermediate host or secondary host. That doesn't happen with Taenia saginata, the beef tapeworm. Only the pork tapeworm, and there are a few other tapeworms in which this can happen too, but they're not like common like a pork or beef. They're like ones that are associated with like foxes and rabbits, and they could get to dogs, but they can get to dogs by dogs eating some other kind of mammal, so they're not like anywhere near as common as something like Taenia solium. When the person ingests the egg, like it basically functions just like what happens with the pig. The eggs then get into the circulatory system and go into other areas of the body. It could be the muscles, and I saw a lot of really gross pictures of when people actually have cysticercosis in different muscles, but primarily the problem is when it gets in their brain. There's such a good blood flow to the brain that it seems that a lot of the cysticerci get into the brain and cause a lot of problems. So if you remember that not only in the video, but we talked about it too, it's one of the leading, if not the leading cause of epilepsy worldwide. And it's really one of the most common reasons for children getting epilepsy here in like Southern California, the LA area, in any of the big cities that are near the border, you know, to Mexico. And the reason why it's such a problem is because it's passed through the fecal-oral route. Because basically, a person has a tapeworm. Those eggs or proglottids are exiting in the feces, and somehow that fecal material is contaminating something, either person to person, or you know the food system, or like on fresh, you know, raw vegetables and fruits. So anything that you can pick up the fecal-oral route is a lot harder to control, and it's a lot easier to get. It's much easier to pick up something like that than it is for you to ingest undercooked pork. Because if you're really in an area where there's a lot of tapeworms, you would just simply, you think, cook the pork well, and then you wouldn't have to worry about that. Especially when, like I said, you can actually see it in the meat itself. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you how it's like shown in the, so this is how you can get to it. You go to disease, and then it talks about the difference between the tapeworm disease and cysticercosis, and just click on cysticercosis. You can look at cysticercosis up here in that A to Z index as well. So here you see some like MRIs that show, see all these little dots in here? Those are all those little cysticerci in the brain. So depending on where they are in somebody's brain, that would impact what kind of, you know, symptoms that they would have. And as you can see, it normally is multiple. Because if there's a proglottid, it's going to have a lot of eggs, and if somebody is releasing all those eggs, there's going to be a lot of eggs, so it's easier to pick up multiple ones.
What can they do once they're in the brain?
There is medications that can help, but there also are all kinds of other things that can happen too. Like if they die off, they can cause all kinds of problems too, like your immune system starts reacting to them, because they kind of produce enzymes that sort of make them not as easy to detect by the immune system. So like when they do die off, your body like responds a lot more intensely to them. And they can also like swell and cause infections and stuff like that as well. So here too, then if you go to biology to look at that life cycle, there's a little, and I just like never saw this before, so I don't know how new this is, but actually like it even talks to me. Makes it really easy.
The system involves two stages: the adult tapeworm, which lives in the human intestine, and the larval stage, which causes cysticercosis. Cysticercosis is an infection of both people and pigs, and is caused by ingestion of tinea solium eggs, or gravid proglottids shed in the feces of a human tapeworm carrier. Excreted eggs can contaminate.
So if you guys are looking at your life cycle has just this little extra arm added to it. Okay. So everybody with me so far? Yes.
This is the one that you want to test, not just the human one?
Correct. But in your notes, I have this one.
Okay.
It has like the extra little thing, because here it's just showing that a person could ingest it too. Otherwise, the rest of the life cycle that they're going to come up with is going to look exactly like the one that we just came from. So what you just have to remember is the difference between getting a tapeworm and getting cysticercosis has to do with how you are exposed to it. One, you're ingesting undercooked pork, you're getting a tapeworm. Easier to control, not as serious of a disease. Getting cysticercosis, much easier. You're getting it just the same way that the pig would get it, is you're just ingesting something that has those contamination with that fecal material. Which people who have the tapeworm themselves can give themselves cysticercosis too, if they're not like washing their hands well and so on.
In soil, hands, and food. Human infection can result from either ingestion of contaminated food or by autoinfection. Autoinfection occurs when a person carrying an adult Taenia tapeworm ingests eggs produced by their own tapeworm, usually through fecal-oral transmission. Once eggs are ingested, oncospheres hatch in the intestine, invade the intestinal wall, and migrate to striated muscles, as well as the brain, liver, and other tissues, where they develop into cysticerci. In humans, these cysts can cause serious sequelae if they localize in the brain, resulting in a condition known as neurocysticercosis. Human tapeworm infections, also called tinniasis, occur after humans ingest undercooked pork containing the larval stages, or cysticerci. Cysts evaginate and attach to the small intestine by their scolex. Adult tapeworms develop and can grow up to 2 meters to 7 meters in length and can produce up to 1,000 proglottids, each with approximately 50,000 eggs. Tapeworms can reside in the small intestine for several years. Taenia solium is found worldwide. Because pigs are intermediate hosts of the parasite, completion of the life cycle occurs in regions where humans live in close contact with pigs and eat undercooked pork. It is important to note that human cysticercosis is acquired by ingesting Taenia solium eggs shed in the feces of a human tapeworm carrier, and thus can occur in populations that neither eat pork nor share environments with pigs. The larval stages of other Taenia species, such as Taenia multiceps, Taenia cerealis, Taenia brani, Taenia teiniformis, and Taenia crassiceps, can also cause human cysticercosis of the brain, subcutaneous tissue, eye, or liver.
So this is really significant for us because we live in an area where people frequently move here or travel here from areas in which they have tapeworms. That makes us at much greater risk than people that live in other cities that aren't really subject to that. So a lot of people that migrate or immigrate here from South America, Central America, it's not uncommon to have a tapeworm. And the person might not know that they have a tapeworm, and then just through not, the best hygiene. Because sometimes, like, even when people want to have the best hygiene, you still could be in a situation like, I'm sure this has never happened to you, right, that a bathroom was out of soap, or maybe there wasn't even like good water running from the sink or something. I mean, sometimes those things happen. If you ever like check restaurants and see like what kind of restaurants are closed in your area or something, one of the most frequent cause of restaurants being closed is because they don't have hot water, they don't have running water, and they're then being just shut down like temporarily by the health department. I mean, things like that happen. So like even under good conditions, it's not unusual for there to be some kind of situation where people are not able to use the best hygiene. And we already talked about some of the stuff out in the fields with the migrant farm workers. This is something that infects a lot of migrant farm workers. Before I go any farther though, you had a...
Well, you answered the question. I was going to ask, do people know that they have these things, or they just are living everyday normal lives with worms?
With tapeworms?
Yeah.
A lot of people do not know that they have a tapeworm. You might actually see it in the feces. That might be the only reason. They might not have any like particular symptoms. Yes, Michelle.
I don't really understand like the difference. Like, is it just because with cysticercosis you are ingesting like the feces from a human instead of like eating undercooked pork? That's like the only difference. Right?
Well,
That's
that's
like
kind
the
of a
only thing.
significant
No,
difference.
I realize that, but that's not the only thing. Right?
I mean, at that particular stage, yes, but then it goes on to be different too, right? Because one is getting into your muscles and your brain and your eyes, and the other one is just staying in
It's
your
just-
intestines, yeah.
Oh.
So it's just like when you're saying there's only one difference. I mean, no, there's not really just one difference, but how you get it. One way, you ingest feces of somebody who has a tapeworm, you get cysticercosis. The other way, you're I mean, they're so completely different, right? So it's kind of not like it's just this little difference, it's so significant. You could eat undercooked pork every day, day in, for, you know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the rest of your life. You're never going to get cysticercosis again, right? So it's completely different. And the stage that you're ingesting is completely different. If somebody ate, if there was cannibalism and somebody ate a human who had cysticercosis, they would actually get a tapeworm. Right, this shouldn't be like, unless I'm somehow like saying something that's confusing, it should be pretty straightforward. Right? Understand patients from eating contaminated meat. That's just kind of something that people have heard of tapeworms before. What you probably have never heard of before, though, is cysticercosis. And it just became much better known when not just migrant farm workers who weren't necessarily getting good medical care were getting it, but when children of affluent families came down with it, because those families were hiring people that came from these other countries that were carrying tapeworm, and now suddenly their kids have epilepsy or have cysticercosis. Their nannies, their, you know, like people that were cleaning the house or cooking or such. Okay, so it's just significant for you guys to know, because this is going to be something that you will be coming across if you're going into the medical field. If you look at kind of the area, let's see. Resources for health professionals. You could read a little bit more about this, but where's the part that they have, maybe I missed. There's, oh, here, though, one thing that I do want to say, that remember when we were talking about the paper and everything, for those of you who still haven't done your paper, when you're on CDC's website, you will see some of these other things here, like articles, which these are peer-reviewed journals that are on here. So when you see that over to the side, plus sometimes you'll see it listed over here too. But where is it? They have included, okay, here it is. They've included now cysticercosis in this neglected parasitic infections in the U.S. There are certain number, I think there's only like 10. Chagas disease, that's one that we talked about too. Remember Chagas disease? Toxoplasmosis, trichomonas. The only one that we didn't talk about is the toxoplasmosis. That's because they do realize that there are so many people being affected by these particular parasites in the U.S. And before that, the idea is that, oh yes, we know these happen in other countries, but you know, it's not really a problem here. Now they do really realize that. So looking at this, parasitic infections are typically associated with poor and often marginalized communities in low-income countries. However, these infections are also present in the U.S. And just now, because they're setting this up as a priority, why? Number of people infected, severity of the illness, and the ability to prevent and treat. Where before, that was not something that was really being recognized. It was just, again, why they're called neglected parasitic infections. Because this was something that people did not realize it was happening. You know, it really took maybe just like the past 10 years becoming much more known. 20 years ago, maybe somebody would have figured it out. So this is something that we'll be seeing more and more of because it is harder to control anything that's the fecal oral route. We don't want people to get tapeworms just because you don't want to have people carrying parasites, but the scary thing about people getting the tapeworms is not them having a tapeworm itself, but them passing on cysticercosis to somebody else or, you know, even themselves. Okay, getting something in your brain that's taking up space in your brain, or like if you really like feel like it, you could look at some of the other pictures where I think somebody asked me, does it get in your muscles? And I know it could get in your muscles, but there's a lot of really gross pictures, like people get these really big lumps where they get them like, you know, in all different muscles. There's a lot of really, really good pictures there, like x-rays and such that show them all like throughout people's like large muscles, like in their legs and in their thoracic area and everything. And then just like really big lumps. There was one picture that showed like had somebody had one like right here, this really huge lump that was full of those. But obviously those could be treated or survive much better than if you have something in your brain like that. So that's why it's important for you to, you know, understand the difference. Okay, so anybody have any questions about that? You're going to need to draw out or explain that life cycle, including the cysticercosis. Remember the last one where I asked for a couple of sentences about whether it was Giardia or Entamoeba histolytica? I'll ask for you to explain the difference between the severity of those two infections and, you know, the significance of how you would pick it up. And really, if you go on and read further in here about prevention, I mean, prevention really just has to do with always washing your hands before you eat, because then you don't have to worry, like even if you got something on your hands, you're washing it off before it's making it to your mouth. Not drinking any kind of untreated water, so even if you're traveling, you're always like making sure that you're drinking bottled water or filtered water that's also treated. So you're filtering it, you're treating it yourself. Not eating any kinds of fruits and vegetables that cannot be peeled. Not washing any of those fruits and vegetables in contaminated water, obviously. And then, of course, just being careful when you go to restaurants. Because if there are people, like, do you think people from other countries work in restaurants? Right? That's like obvious, right? So then that's another source. If they went and actually really like checked everybody that worked in a restaurant at all, because all it takes is just having like busboys and other people that are working in a restaurant to not have great hygiene in the bathroom, to touch something that somebody else is going to touch after they've washed their hands, to have that person handling your food or bringing your water to your table, touching the edge of it like that. I mean, there's only so much you can do picking it up like that. But you can control it in all those other ways by just making sure that you're washing your hands well. And you're not just thinking about your own hygiene, you're just thinking about, okay, well, I might have good hygiene, but if I touch something that somebody else has touched that didn't have good hygiene, well, suddenly now I have that contamination. That's why in the beginning of class, I said, like, we'll never make it through a day without talking about the fecal oral route. Because like here, it's like parasites, viruses, bacteria, so many things that you pick up, that's how you pick it up. Okay, so that should be good, right? So cdc.gov if you want more information. Otherwise, you don't need to go on here and get any more. I've given you what you need to know. You have that life cycle in there. You don't have to draw pictures of all those little, areas. You just have to say what happens at those stages. So you guys can close your books. I have one question for you.